Today, I'm going to talk about how I photograph interiors with interior designers, and I'm including some tips that you're not going to want to miss for your own photography. I'm Luke Cleland, and I am a wedding photographer talking about interior design photography. And that's because about the same time that I started my own wedding business, I had a friend of a friend who was starting an interior design business, and she really wanted to post on this big new thing called Instagram. And so she asked me to take photos of her work. Now, the only problem was that I had no idea how to do this. I was very confident in that I could figure it out, but I had never done something like this. I had just kind of like a rough idea based on what I'd searched on like blogs or whatever. But with a lot of trial and error and a lot of patience from this designer, I figured it out on that first shoot day. And over the years, I taught myself the skills and techniques that I needed in order to take, really great interior photography in my own way that worked for me and my clients. I really enjoy interior photography, mostly because it's so different than weddings. It's much more calm, it's slower paced. You're dealing with just like interiors instead of people. And so it's a nice break for me. I usually keep around 4 to 5 clients a year. It's usually during my winter, my off season for weddings. It's a great way to make some additional income in a slow season. And I really enjoy it. I really find it a fun challenge for myself. Now, before I get into it, I think it's important to note kind of my approach into like interior photography. I am by no means saying like this is the only way to do it or this is the absolute best way to do it. But I have developed, how I shoot these interiors based on what my clients needed, what my clients want. And so that means I'm not always shooting at f/22 or whatever it is. I'm sure there is like, best practices as interior photography, but what I do is just what works best for me and what works best for my clients. Typically, I'm working with a small business, an interior designer who probably has a small team and pretty like moderate to small photography budgets. So sure, with bigger budgets, you could do like windows scrimming and outdoor lighting and like do all this stuff. But what my clients were looking for was really high quality photography, but doing it in a relatively, quick amount of time and kind of a lot of photos so that they can share it on social media. So I'm going to go over the equipment that I use, some of the lighting techniques that I use, and also a little bit about composition specifically for interiors and architecture. Now, when I first started, I actually used a combination of prime lenses. I had a 35mm, a 50mm, and an 85mm. That was mostly because that's just what I had. And I found that it worked really nicely. It was typically in homes that had, a lot of space. And so I wasn't necessarily constricted by like getting myself into a wall. Of course, there was times that I wish I had like a wider lens for certain things, but I felt like it was a good foundation with just kind of starting with what I had. But what I use now is a 24-70 f/4 lens. Now you could use a 2.8 lens as well, but I typically don't shoot anything below f/4. And again, that's just like the lens that I have. And so I find that it works really great. It's a lot easier than like switching out lenses all the time. And going back to my clients' needs, my shoots needed to be quick. They couldn't be dragged on forever and ever. So I typically bring 2 camera bodies with me, just one as a backup and one as my primary, and then a 24-70. And then I also bring like a backup 35mm prime, just in case something like bad happened with my lens and I could still take photos of some type. I also bring with me 2 to 5 speed lights. Now, for the most part, I'm using 2 speed lights, but if there's a really, crazy scenario with, I don't know, a house with lots of different kind of facets and hallways and things, then sometimes I have used up to 5 flashes, which is kind of crazy, but that's kind of like, I don't do that often, but I like love doing that. I love the challenge of like lighting things in certain ways in order to get this like beautiful result that wouldn't be possible otherwise. I bring a radio trigger to trigger all those flashes. I bring flash gels. Now, I don't use this often, but it's something that, man, when I do need it, there is no other way to fix the problem than to have a flash gel with you. And so I always make sure that I have, some warm and cool flash gels. I bring a laptop. I'm sure if you have an iPad, that would work great. And on that laptop, I have a software called DSLR Dashboard. Even if you're not an interior photographer, this software is free. I'm not sponsored or anything. It's a free software that will let you tether wirelessly to a computer. It's totally awesome. I don't do cords anymore. For years, I just used Lightroom and I had an orange tether cable. And while that's really nice, it's fast, you can edit the photos. Having a cord is a pain in the butt. And so I love this software. There's lots of limitations to it. You can only view a low resolution like JPEG. And it's kind of like manual. It's not like the best user experience ever. But if you're looking for something free, I'll put a link for it in the description if you want to check it out. Then I bring a few light stands with me. I use one light stand with a shelf to put my laptop on. And then the rest of the light stands I use for my speed lights. And then lastly, I bring an extension cord so I can plug in my laptop, because using that, tethering software eats up your battery. So it's nice to have it plugged in. Lighting. I use a ton of flash. Now, this is surprising, I think, to most people. They're like, will you use flash? Yes, I love flash. When I started out with those first shoots, I thought interior photography was on a tripod with super long exposures, and that's how you had to do everything. The problem was that it took forever. We would take 5 photos and it would be, a 3-4 hour long photo shoot. Maybe not that extreme, but it felt like forever and there was just not that much content. And so my client was like, is there some way that we can get great lighting but do it quicker? And I was like, yes, there is. Flash. And honestly, doing flash for interiors honed my skills of photography in a way that in flash photography, that nothing else would. So I got really good at using flash in really controlled ways in order to create, beautiful images and beautiful lighting for interior spaces, which are not always the perfect lighting scenario. If you're not at the right time of the day, if you don't have a lot of windows, you can be really stuck. But using flash can solve so many of those issues. Now, I still do some longer exposures, maybe more in the 15th of a second or 1/8 of a second range. But for the most part, I use flash in at least, 50 to 60% of the photos that I take. The last thing I'll say about lighting is I use a single temperature of lighting for 90% of the photography that I do. I think this is really important. So one of the first things that I do that when I go into a space is shut all the lights off. And everyone, the owners of the home are very confused. They're like, do you want the lights on? How are you going to see anything? And so, no, I don't use interior lighting because it's very yellow. And so what I try to do is I'm shooting these during the day, which means I have daylight coming in. And so for the inside, I use either the natural daytime light coming in, or I add flash, which will balance that match. So for the most part, I try really hard to not have any type of mixed lighting. And I think that really adds to the cleanness and the beauty of my interior work. So now let's talk composition. So I think the first thing that's really important in interior photography is vertical lines. The wider your lens is, the more crazy lines can get. And so it has to do with the distortion of your lens. If you have a 25mm lens and you're like aimed up at a building, you'll notice that the lines of the building will like go out like this. And this is really noticeable when you take interior photography, architecture photography. Like if you want it to look like it actually looks, then you have to be very careful about how you use lines in your photography. Now, how to deal with this is making sure that your camera is both level like this and also like perpendicularly straight to whatever you're shooting. Now, I'm going to explain this by using a highlighter and my AirPods case, okay? So if this is, let's call it the wall that you're photographing, your camera needs to be like perpendicular to it as well as level. Okay, so let's explain like the perpendicular. So if this is my camera and I'm shooting this wall here, I don't want it to be like at an angle like this or like this. Even if it's very subtle, if you're at 24mm, this is going to be very noticeable by just like tugging your camera a little bit, you're going to notice like straight or curved or crooked lines. And so you want to put in the effort to make sure that your camera is exactly kind of aligned with the lines or the architecture that you're shooting. Now, the other important thing is that your camera is like level horizontally as well. So if you start aiming your camera up or down, that's when you'll start getting crazy lines in whatever you're shooting. And so for interior photography, a couple things that I do is, yes, using a tripod can be helpful, especially if you have a little bubble level on your tripod, which I don't actually use that much. What I use is the level tool on your camera. And so I think all cameras have this. My Nikon camera has it, where you turn on this visual setting where it tells you if your camera is like straight this way and straight this way. Using that is absolutely key in order to get straight lines so everything like looks as it should. The other big tip that I would give you in terms of kind of composition and getting the right shots, and I learned this from working for an interior designer a few years ago that was doing a bunch of interior design and then kind of moved into Airbnbs. And so I would shoot a bunch of her Airbnbs. And one thing that she always requested was photos in every corner of the room, because she wanted kind of like, it was more like real estate-y photography, which I don't do, but she wanted really good coverage in every room. And actually, I learned a lot from doing that, because when you go into a room, and this is what I'll still do today, is I'll go into a room and shoot from all four corners of the room. And if I don't shoot it, I will at least walk around the whole outside of the room first. And that will let me see, oh, I like this angle. Oh, I like being able to see it from there. And that will just give you a whole bunch of different vantage points that you'll be able to photograph later. Another thing is that I like to think like wide, medium, tight. And so I'll go through and shoot all my wide shots first, then I'll go through and do all my medium shots, and then I'll go through and do all my detail shots of the space. So hopefully those things were helpful for you if you're interested in going on like a real in-depth look into interior photography. Make sure you sign up for my newsletter. All my classes and courses are announced on my newsletter, and specifically the classes I'm only going to share on my newsletter. And so these classes are on a specific topic, like I have one coming up soon about interior photography, where I do the full class and then we do a full super in-depth Q&A. And that's where I actually learned that a lot of you guys wanted this video and you want a class about interior photography. So if you want to be a part of this class, make sure that you sign up for the newsletter. I will put a link in the description below so that you can sign up, and we will see you in one of those classes. Okay, bye.